Now, you all have a respiration test next Monday. We have finished that information. I'm giving you the option of asking questions when we finish the discussion in lab today, if you've already been working on your respiration lecture study guide. But if you haven't, Wednesday's lab is a pig dissection lab, so there probably will be minutes at the end of that lab as well. So jump all over it so you can ask in lab next time at the end of the procedure. Okay. You can do well on a respiration test, so pair up with your friends and drill each other. You've got 7 days to be drilling left, so you could make up for some bad moments. Digestive? Well, I'm just starting. I have no idea. I doubt you'll get it in before the 31st. You might, have you looked ahead at your lab exam schedule? You might get that lab exam in, but you don't?
No, it's Sunday or Thursday.
Oh. Well, the answer is no then, if that's when the lab exam is, because logically you want to learn your structures of the digestive system before you do the whole schmack on the digestive system. All right. This digestive system or tract is a long tube. Granted, there are specializations along the tube from your... Anybody else got one in that next to the last row? An extra one? Send this back. Thank you. So if you're talking mouth to anus, in an adult, it's a 30-foot long tube. And as we get deeper into this story, we'll talk about some of the specializations along the way. But every time you go into lab, they're giving you a cross-section out of the tubular organ. Now, will they give you the whole piece of pie like this? Like a cross-section of an esophagus? No. Oftentimes, could you hold your stapling when I'm not talking or when a video is not running, if you don't mind? I'm sorry. It just, sometimes people around you comment on the loud things that you do to disturb each other, so thanks. Back to the story. You won't get usually the whole circle. You'll get like the bottom piece of pie. So it might show a slight curvature so that you know you're getting the bottom piece of pie. Do you understand what I mean by that? Like, you'd only get this much on a slide right here. So, but when you magnify it, you're not even probably going to notice the curvature anymore because it's so big, you just see a small region of it. But one of the first things they're going to ask you is, can you identify these 4 layers, 1, 2, 3, 4, as you work from the layer that's closest to your food to the outside furthest away. So that corresponds to 1, 2, 3, 4 on this handout sheet. So in order to answer these questions, you've got to know what to look for in each of these 4 layers, and I'm fixing to go over that with you. When we start this system called the digestive system, and actually there's quite a few names for this system. It's also called the gastrointestinal, all one word, tract or system. So therefore they come up with the abbreviation GI tract from gastrointestinal. And a very old archaic word for it is alimentary canal. So those are all 3 references to your digestive system. So if we're looking at an organ, this inner layer number 1 is called the mucosa layer. You're going to know you're in the mucosa layer if you see the dark staining, usually purple, epithelial tissue, because that's usually the innermost tissue. And it depends on where you are in the tube. If you are in either of the small or large intestines, it's going to be a kind of epithelium that's specialized for absorption. And the cells with the most surface area are columnar cells. But if it's just a friction tube, then you're going to have stratified tissue, so that if you scrub a few layers off, it doesn't matter, and you want it to be like the inside of a PVC pipe, so it's probably going to be stratified squamous. So that's your esophagus, that's your anus, because it's just a transport tube. So we will comment on what it's specialized for, but since this is your digestive tract, some of the more important organs are specialized for secretion or absorption, except for the friction tubes I just mentioned. Now, in the mucosa layer, it will not just be epithelium, because epithelium has no blood vessels. You learned that in Anatomy 1, and it would die. So always intimately associated with the epithelium is connective tissue. And the connective tissue is just a little thin bit of connective tissue to hook the epithelium on so it doesn't peel loose. That connective tissue layer is called lamina, which means layer, propria. This is the first layer of connective tissue. And it supports and binds the epithelium to the underlying muscle. That's its job. But it's keeping the epithelium alive because there are tiny little circulatory blood vessels here. Not huge ones, little ones. This is a digestive tract. It's full of food. It's at body temperature. There's plenty of moisture. Those are the 3 basic needs of any parasitic organism that would want to get inside you and live off of you. So it's not surprising that there are little patches of white blood cells periodically along these digestive organs to protect and defend you against a parasite. And you might have just swallowed it with your food. Virus, bacterium, parasitic worm, or protozoan of some type. So these little patches of several hundred white blood cells are called lymph nodules because they're not as big as a whole full-blown lymph node. And if there are other special glands, like extra mucus glands, then they would be there to lubricate your food. And there might be special digestive chemicals for digestion, DIG, that will come up. If so, I will mention them to you. Are we okay so far? The last thing in the mucosa layer is a little teeny bit of muscle. And that this muscle will look like sirloin steaks. So just to give you an example, if we were talking about something that was stratified squamous epithelium, you've seen this many times. And then underneath that you might get a few little swirly blood vessels in an odd shaped vein, but really the lamina propria is pretty boring. And then beneath that you're going to get little patches of muscle fiber cells in clusters like this. So that's what I mean. It looks like little cross sections of sirloin steaks or something, but they will be pink like muscle. That's the end of the mucosa layer when you get below that. What does that muscle do? It makes specializations in the inner lining of these organs. Like today you study stomach. The stomach has inside of it some folds so it can expand when it's acting as a storage sac. Those are called rugae. So it is this tiny little bit of muscle here that causes the rugae to form in the mucosa layer. There's another thing you study today. In the small intestine, you study some circular folds. The purpose of the circular folds in your small intestine is so that your food, your digested food, isn't running along the bottom of a small intestine like sludge in the bottom of a concrete sewer pipe. Instead, you want all that food to coat all of the walls. So it's got grooves in it like a screw. And those grooves are called plicae circularis in the small intestine and plicae semilunaris in the large. But I show them to you in the small intestine today. So all inner folds are not the same. They can be random folds like the rugae, or they can be very regular folds as you see in the small intestine. But those are caused by the muscle in the mucosa layer. So you can say it that way, more Americanized, or you can say the muscularis mucosa, which is more Latinized, however you want to do it. Are you clear on that layer? Then you get to a boring layer, the lightest staining layer. Because this layer is various kinds of connective tissue, and we're really not staining it to reveal all the fibers that much, so you'll see a few streaky fibers in there. So loose connective tissue. This is how you're going to know you're in this layer. You have big blood vessels. This is where you're going to find your major arteries and veins. So if you're looking in a pretty white layer, but down in that white layer, you see huge arteries or huge veins, then you're going to tell yourself this other than vessels, this pretty boring layer right here is your submucosal layer. There can be glands that push down into that layer, and if there are, we'll mention them to you. There could be touch receptors, light touch receptors like Meissner's corpuscle, to tell your digestive tract there's food in there, so it stays activated and moving the contents along. So we'll talk about those things if we have a slide that shows something specialized like that. Now the next layer you see below the boring light colored submucosa is the muscularis layer. And remember, you're only going to have the bottom little region here, so you're not going to have the whole circle. But the first layer of muscle you're going to run into is running around the whole organ, even though you don't have the same thing. So on your slide, it's going to look like it's running which direction? Horizontal, left and right. Do you agree? And the layer below that is running down the length of this 30-foot tube. So that's longitudinal smooth muscle. So it'll be an inner circular layer which constricts the tube, and an outer longitudinal layer which shortens the tube. And then there's an asterisk, because the stomach is a very special organ. It has an additional innermost layer that is running at a diagonal, and the word for diagonal is oblique smooth muscle layer. So this is all smooth involuntary visceral muscle. Now, in Anatomy 1, you learned that if you just wanted to crudely move food or contents of a tube further down, then you wouldn't just stimulate one of these muscle layers, you would stimulate both. The inner circular muscle layer, this is looking at it from a longitudinal view, and the outer longitudinal muscle layer. And the way you stimulated it in Anatomy 1 was you had a nerve cell, neuron, and it came down and it would branch to some of the cells in these muscle layers. But smooth muscle has the ability of one cell being capable of sending the stimulation to the next cell that it's touching. My diagram's not real good, so I didn't draw them close enough to touch. But the point is, if you start that at a proximal end of the tube, it's going to pass that impulse down the length of the tube distally. So you get a crude wave of muscle contraction starting at an earlier point, working distally. That kind of propulsion was called peristalsis, or perhaps your teacher called it propulsive peristalsis, because it's propelling the contents further along the way. Yes, Alicia.
Oh, I was saying to move the, could you move the page
Up,
so we
yeah.
see-
Is that better?
Yes.
Okay, we're right here. Peristalsis or propulsive peristalsis. And it won't go necessarily from your pharynx all the way down to your anus at one time. It may do it within the stomach, for instance, to move the contents towards the small intestine, or it may do it in certain regions of the small intestine. but it's moving it along when it's ready to move along. Are we okay so far? Now, what we haven't said here, and we'll come back and say it, is sometimes we don't stimulate both layers at once. Sometimes we stimulate only one layer, and we'll get to organs where that's the case and why do we do it that way. But for just gross movement, like in your esophagus or your anus, it is propulsive peristalsis. So far, so good. Is this making sense? Okay. The outside of this, there may just be one thin, flat layer of, here's your muscle, of squamous epithelium. That makes a membrane that you've been calling visceral peritoneum in Anatomy 1 that's glued to your visceral organs. So you wouldn't see that with your naked eye. You could only see that through microscopy, and only if it was very nicely preserved. Now, the serosa can be more than one layer if there's fat embedded out here, or there's nerves out here, or there's blood vessels out here. So it could be going along real flat like that, and all of a sudden it would widen out as it has a lot of adipose or nerves or vessels in it. So you kind of have to look around the whole outside of the organ on the slide and see if it gets wider at any point. But the purpose of the serosa or adventitia layer is we want the surface of these organs slippery so they glide across one another and don't lead to inflammation, because when you irritate something and get it inflamed and swollen, that's a perfect habitat for disease or infection to set in. So the serum, serosa, is a watery lubricant that the membrane secretes. And it too is hooked on by connective tissue, but not a lot of it, so you probably won't notice the connective tissue. Are you okay on that? So on your slides, the slide might say esophagus, identify the 4 layers. When they say 4 layers, they're talking about these 4 layers over and over again, slide after slide. So far, so good? Okay. And we only do 2 slides per lab, so you'll have time to keep coming back and comparing. How am I going to know an esophagus from a small intestine, from a stomach? So we're going to start at the proximal end of this 30-foot long tube, your mouth, which is properly known as the oral cavity, but there are subcompartments within the oral cavity. And I'm going to admit right now, some of this you either heard in lab or you're fixing to hear in lab. So you could take that as, why did she have to say that again? Or you could take it as, yeah, I got that, good, I understood that. Or you people in the afternoon lab, you'll be miles ahead because you heard bits and pieces. But sometimes we have to go back and hit something else that we didn't hit with the models that we have available in the lab. So I apologize if you feel that this is too redundant. But in your oral cavity, we talk about subcavities, parts of the oral cavity. So right here, where your date in Polk County puts his snuff, ladies, that's the vestibule. In other words, it's the cavity between your teeth and your lips, the vestibule. So that's a very small part of the oral cavity. Lips are important. They're there to position your food over your teeth for mastication or chewing, and we'll get to that vocabulary word in a minute. So where you apply your chapped lip medication, the dry part of your lip, that's called your vermilion. Your vermilion is the colored part of your lip that is dry. And so it is dry because it's keratinized, stratified squamous epithelium. If you go like this, you can look in the mirror and see where it changes from being dry to where it becomes mucous membrane. Then it doesn't have keratin anymore. It's just stratified squamous epithelium at that point. So it varies, but the outside is keratinized and therefore dry. What this vermilion lip is covering is a sphincter muscle that went around the hole being your mouth. Anything that goes around and when it contracts, it constricts and shuts a tube, that's a sphincter. So orbicularis oris was the sphincter of the mouth that you learned in Anatomy 1. Just like you had one around your eye called the orbicularis oculi. Remember those round muscles? Okay. You want your lips to stay close to your teeth because you don't want to look like Forrest Gump. Yeah, just teasing, but you know, that was how his character was made to be. So you have a connective tissue covered with this slick mucous epithelium that helps hold your lip to your gum. And that is called your labial frenulum. So you can feel one up top in the midline, and you can feel one in your lower lip as well. And we're going to come back to the frenulum comment in just a minute and talk about when they're too long or too short. Now, we have two lips. We are not like Bunny Rabbit, who has a split upper lip. That's why the non-euphemistic nickname for an incomplete upper lip is called a hare lip, because of the bunny rabbit having a split lip. But the proper clinical name for that is a cleft lip, when you have an incomplete upper lip. The roof of your mouth is called your palate. Well, some people have an incomplete roof of their mouth, so that is called a cleft palate. A cleft is a gap. So the gene that is mutated or defective, often you get the cleft lip and the cleft palate in the same child because they're linked genes. But fortunately, these days, plastic surgery has become so good that if they do that when the infant is very young, a lot of times you can't even really tell that they had a cleft lip anymore. So they have done wonders in that correction, which is obviously important so the child won't be teased throughout their life because they look different. But it also is important because the roof of your mouth has so much to do with speech, and it has a lot to do with separating your olfactory smell nerves from your gustation. So it could interfere with all of those different senses if you didn't have the proper structural apparatus in place. So the roof of your mouth, the palate, was made out of two different named bones, four bones actually, two maxillae and two palatine bones. So you see this in lab today. We'll hit that a little harder in the lab, but that you can feel with your tongue is hard. If you slide your tongue distally or back in your mouth, you feel where the hard palate ends, but you can still press against flexible muscle and connective tissue that's covered with slick mucous epithelium. That's known as your soft palate, and hanging from the soft palate is that little appendage right there that is called the uvula. The uvula. And the uvula is important because when you swallow, and to swallow is called deglutition. So know any of the vocabulary words that are underlined or in quotes or circled or anything like that. But what is supposed to happen when you swallow is your tongue retracts back. Well, the tongue retracting back, you know from respiration, is supposed to hit that elastic cartilage of your larynx called the epiglottis and shut it down over your airway so that food and water can't go that way. And the other thing that's happening as your tongue retracts back is it's shoving the undigested ball of food, the bolus of food, through your mouth, through the pharynx, and into the top of your esophagus. At the same time that is shoving everything downward, the backing up of the tongue, the retraction of the tongue, is at the same time occurring when the uvula, which has a little muscle in it, is flapping up. That's to protect your nasopharynx so that food doesn't go up into your nasal cavity. So that's protecting your nasal cavity, and the epiglottis is protecting your airway, and hopefully the food goes pharynx to esophagus. That's the intent. And we do have muscles that raise your pharynx at the same time, so you're literally like shortening an athletic sock. You're literally shortening your pharynx to cram the food right through it into the top of your esophagus. From then on, it's not voluntary anymore. From then on, it's that peristaltic wave that I just discussed with you. So are we okay on that? Okay. Teeth, and this you do quite a bit with teeth in the lab. Teeth are for chewing, which is mastication, another vocabulary word. And teeth are located in a border of your maxilla, lower border, and upper border of your mandible. These are your jawbones. And that process has sockets in it. And if you're kind of a teardrop shaped socket, which sort of a tooth socket is, you're alveolar shaped, you're swollen socket. So that socket filled ridge on both your upper and lower jaw bones is called the alveolar ridge. That kind of joint is only found in teeth to jaws, is a peg in socket type of joint, which you learned in Anatomy 1 was called a gomphosis. And it is not supposed to move, so it's an immovable joint. Immovable joints were called synarthrotic joints or a synarthrosis from Anatomy 1. So all of this should be a review, but you do need to know it because it's characteristic of the teeth. If your teeth are moving, there's only 2 appropriate times for your teeth to be wiggling. That's if there's a new tooth butting up underneath the existing tooth and it's breaking the ligament connections, then you'd have a wiggler. Or if you've got dental apparatus in your mouth, like braces or retainers or something like that, then those are purposely breaking some of your ligaments so you can realign your teeth. And then once they're held in place by the apparatus, then new ligament fibers should grow and they should become stationary again. So otherwise, you either have had trauma to your mouth or gingivitis, infection of your gum, or deterioration of your bone. Something is going on if your teeth are getting wiggly. Certain oral conditions like severe alcoholism and stuff can change the environment of the mouth and allow the wrong microbes to live. We all have microbes in our mouth, but it can allow the wrong microbes to overpopulate your mouth and can lead to loose teeth and losing your teeth and infections of the gum, et cetera, et cetera. Your gums, one is a gingiva, the plural is gingivae. And so you know if they're inflamed, you've heard the TV commercials, inflammation is gingivitis. Itis, inflammation of whatever the prefix is, your gums. Inflamed gums. Now the next thing I'm going to say, there are exceptions. But the majority of the population have 2 sets of teeth in their lifetime. Baby teeth and then permanent teeth. Those are known as dentitions. Look at me. This is not a dentition and this is a dentition. What is in your face right now is one dentition, your adult or permanent dentition. And what you had as a child was the temporary. The temporary teeth can be called at least 4 different names. Deciduous, because they're like the fall leaves that drop off the trees. Well, these are deciduous teeth because you eventually lose them. Or milk teeth, or baby teeth, or temporary teeth. So you can call them whichever name you wish to. They are 20 teeth, and you divide your mouth into 4 quadrants. So there's 5 teeth in each quadrant, and they are the same 5 teeth in each quadrant. And they're supposed to start appearing for generic baby between 6 months and 2 years of age. But there are many babies who are born and already have little teeth sticking out of their gums. That is not unusual. Y'all are going into clinical health care, many of you. If you're dealing with nursing moms and the baby nips mom's nipple, you don't slap the baby. All you have to do is put your finger right here. If you put your finger right there, they open their mouth. And you won't have to put your finger there but 1 or 2 times. They don't want to lose their new favorite friend, you know. So if they want to breastfeed, they'll learn. That means don't bite mommy, and they will quit biting. So if you know in advance what to do, then if it happens, then you know how to take care of it without shaken baby syndrome or anything else. But anyway. Now, if you're trying to get your kid to daycare so you can finish college or go to work, they can't be biting little Sally Sue either. So good luck on that one. I strongly suggest you bite them back. I didn't say draw blood. I didn't say leave a mark that's permanent. I'm just saying they can't. They just cannot. They won't take them in daycare. They'll kick them out. And you're trying to feed this kid. You can't be losing your job because you stayed home because you didn't teach little Johnny to quit biting all the girls. besides that, everybody's gonna think little Johnny's giving them HIV or any of the other kooky diseases flying around the world these days. So, you know. Anyway. All right, but these are just really generic time frames. Some kids don't get their teeth by 2 years of age, in which case they've been using those gums for a while, and the gums can get so tough that sometimes they have to split the gum to finally let the tooth come through when it finally decides it's going to develop. So there's a wide range of difference in when one child gets teeth and the next child gets teeth. And even when they fall out, there's years difference from one child to another. So in these temporary teeth, you have two, we're doing it in quadrants of your mouth, fourths of your mouth. You have two flat teeth, and those are for slicing off a bit of food. So they have that flat surface. For shredding or tearing food, you have a pointed tooth, which is called a canine or a cuspid. Now, as you use it, it doesn't repair itself, so it wears down. So you may not think yours is so pointed, or you certainly may not think the one example in lab is very pointed, but it's much more curved than the incisors. So by having a comparison there, you can see clearly one has some point to it. But we're not like the saber-toothed tiger whose canine tooth grew longer and longer the older and older he was. We're not like that. We hope we're not like that. You have two molars, and when you're a kid, your molar just has 2 points on the top, so it kind of creates a recess, and the food can get ground between the recess. So this is for mastication, grinding and crushing the food up. So it's got a, we say flat top, it's got points on it, but in other words, it's got a surface on which the food will rest. Those are the last teeth of the child, so some people refer to those as the molar of the child. But if you stick to this name, you can call it that name in the adult or the child, and you won't be messing up. Okay, now let's say they lost their teeth and they're getting their permanent dentition. This usually is people's last set of teeth, but there are people that get a third set of teeth. So, viva la difference, but anyway, I need a third set right about now. So now, if we're doing quadrants again, if there's 32 total adult teeth divided by 4 quadrants of your mouth, there are now 8 teeth per quadrant. So these are the same, they're just bigger. So you get 2 flat incisors, 1 pointed canine, and 2 bicuspids with still 2 points. But now you're going to get 3 more teeth. So these are no longer known as the molars. These are now known as the adult premolar, or just stick to bicuspid. And then the last teeth that the little kid never had are called the molars or tricuspids, because they have 3 points on the surface of them. The first one, if your kid's the generic child, would come in at about 6 years of age, so that's called the 6-year molar. Then the next one at about 12 years old, 12-year molar. And then about the time you graduate from high school or get in first year of college, 18-year molar, which that one is the one that people call the wisdom tooth. But through the eons, the human mouth is getting littler. So a lot of people don't have enough room in their smaller jawbone to accommodate the 18-year molar or wisdom tooth anymore. So some people flat don't even develop them. A lot of times they develop them, but they remain buried in the bone. That's called impacted. Or sometimes they come out sideways because there isn't room in the mouth for them to come out the other way. So if they start coming out in odd positions, or they're putting pressure, then it can cause you discomfort, whether it be inflamed gums or aching. So many people have to have surgically their wisdom teeth removed, and now you know why. It's not that you're defective. Many people have to have their wisdom teeth removed now. And that one isn't generally a problem, because if you're having them out, you're usually having, you know, they didn't come out, or they were coming out crooked. So don't worry about that one with the next thing I'm going to say. If you start yanking out other teeth, however, as you get older, your teeth shift forward in your mouth. So if you're an older adult, and that's usually when you're yanking out teeth, then you usually are encouraged to put something in there, a bridge, or if you didn't take out the whole tooth, a cap or something, because of that shifting as you get older of your teeth forward. Because if you took out a couple of teeth and then there was one tooth back there by itself, it's going to probably shift forward, in which case now the tooth that was above that one that was back there by itself is not getting any pressure when you shut your mouth. And that is what keeps your teeth in your upper jaw, is the pressure of a tooth in your lower jaw against it. So you can literally lose upper jaw teeth because you don't have a tooth underneath it anymore. And if your dentist doesn't explain that to you, that's why we get so furious sometimes. We go, I'll just do without that tooth. No, you won't, because this one up here might fall out later. But, you know, many people do endure because of insurance reasons and whatever. But I'm just telling you, that's what they're trying to get at. When you're younger, it's not as big a problem. If you have a little kid, kindergarten, and they knocked 4 teeth out with a baseball bat, they may not put a bridge in, because that kid's fixing to have teeth in the next year or two. And the shifting is when you're older, not when you're younger. Now, a lot of people put something in anyway just because they care what their little kids look like in the school picture. But if you don't care and you're saving that for the wedding day picture, put up on then, you know, they're probably going to be okay. But you talk to your pediodontist about that kind of stuff. But I'm just saying, that's why there's differences in how they treated something when you're younger versus how they treat the situation when you're older. Are we okay on all that? You definitely do all this in lab. There's basically 3 parts of a healthy tooth and gum situation. The exposed part that you can see is the crown. The part that is covered with your gum but is not embedded in your jaw but is not supposed to be exposed is the neck. So this is under your gingiva, your gums. And it's, well, I'll come back to that later. And the part in your jawbone is your root in the jaw. But like I said, you'll come back to this in lab in a minute. Therefore, the part that is exposed is what is being attacked by oral microbes that live in your mouth, by friction, your toothbrush, and acids and all sorts of things that we eat. So the hardest substance in your body covers the crown, and it's called enamel. That is the hardest substance in the body. And if you scrub your teeth too hard with the toothbrush, and they can tell if you do, because they can see ridges on the enamel and know that you're scrubbing your teeth too hard, then you can wear off your enamel before the end of your life, in which case now you're going to have a hard time with those teeth, maintaining them and protecting them. Also, scrubbing hard can cause your gums to recede. But that is not the only thing that makes your gums recede. They say if you're a clincher, that can make your gums recede. So good luck on all of that in this stressful world. So that's why a lot of people have to wear something that reminds you of a football mouth guard when you sleep, because that's supposed to teach you not to clench, or if you do clench, not to be wearing off your enamel. And they can tell if you're a clincher even if you don't admit it, because it creates little pits on the top of your teeth if you're a clincher. So they know what you are before you admit it. So you might as well fess up. But you know, they're trying to get you to get other styles of toothbrushes now that use just water, I think. Isn't that what the new toothbrush is now?
Water?
Yeah, I think some kind of water-powered thing, because of all of us that don't, you want your teeth to feel slick, and so you just scrub like no tomorrow, and it's not doing you any good. Cementum is hard also. That is what's covering the rest of your tooth. But it's not quite as hard as enamel. Cementum. Sounds hard, cement. So if you do have receding gums and you expose that, then it's easier for you to get wear on your teeth there than it is for you to get dental caries or a cavity through the enamel portion. Lucky for you, now they have white fillers that they use. I can't remember what they're called. There's a name for it. Yeah, is it ceramic? But there's something they call it. But anyway, well, they have veneers too, but that's if you're really covering up your whole tooth. I'm just saying it's like a filling material, but anyway, what? Yeah, I don't know what my guy calls it, but anyway, it's white and they can match it to your tooth. So if you have bad receding gums, nobody will know it because they'll fill in those sensitive areas. And see, that's the problem. When you have eaten through your enamel or cementum, the nerve is closer to the surface, and so then when you're brushing your teeth, that gets you, or you're eating something hot or cold, that gets you, or certainly when the hygienist is on your mouth, that'll get you. So I don't know if it's an epoxy, that's the word I'm looking for, but anyway, there's something they put in there now, and it hardens very quickly, and it's not showing the wear that your teeth have as much anymore. To keep this tooth healthy, there are spaces in the tooth, and so if this were a terribly drawn tooth, you have a big space up here in your tooth and then little spaces that go down into the root of your tooth. These spaces are called root canals, and this space up here is called the pulp or pulp cavity. And in both places, there it is, the pulp cavity and the root canal, there are vessels and nerves. So this is vessels to keep the tooth healthy, but nerves so that you know what kind of pressure you're putting on your food and that sort of thing. Now, this last thing is the tricky thing. Once you get past the tooth proper, the embedded part of the tooth is covered with a membrane. Well, you had this same scenario when you studied bone last semester. There was a bone-forming membrane on the outside of bone, and it was called periosteum. Dont is for dental, orthodontist. So this periodontal membrane is the membrane covering the embedded part of the tooth. And then coming out of it are collagen fibers that go from it over into your jaw. And so these are your tooth-to-bone connection, like you had a bone-to-bone connection between your skeletal bones. So this is called your periodontal ligament, which is listed here, but because we think of teeth something like bone. So ligament, bone to bone, or tooth to bone. Are you okay on that connection then? And that's what you don't want to be breaking loose unless you have another tooth budding out underneath it. Okay, leaving the teeth for now. And by the way, this is the proper vocabulary word for a cavity. It's called a dental caries, is a cavity. C-A-R-I-E-S. We're moving to your tongue. Like your lips had a labial frenulum, your tongue has a lingual frenulum underneath it, to the base of your mouth, to the floor of your mouth. If your lingual frenulum is too short, that's a child that's said to be tongue-tied. They have a hard time moving their tongue in the right position because they don't have enough mobility because their lingual frenulum's too short. So they can snip it to give that child a little more freedom of movement of their tongue, and then they're good to go. If you're interested in speech therapy, speech therapists deal with all kinds of problems like this as far as how to retrain the child how to speak or whatever. And honestly, if we all had been trained like they were and knew all the tricks of the trade, you could do it yourself with your child at home. But you know how children are. If you're hammering them all the time about do this, don't do that, then when you're trying to correct speech, it's just one more thing piled on top of everything else. They may not take you real seriously as you're sitting at the breakfast table while they're eating their Cheerios, trying to get them talk right. Like if you have a little kid who can't say talkie and board, turkey and bird, then you may have gone to school and said to the kindergarten teacher, should I be worrying about this yet? Oh no, it sounds cute. First grade teacher, should I be worrying about this? Oh no, it sounds cute. And you think he sounds cute too. But that is a big mistake. Because the more years you let your child do it, it's becoming a habit. And now you've got to break a more ingrained habit of where they're putting their tongue incorrectly in their mouth, even though you thought it sounded adorable. Because if they go to 8th grade still talking like that, you know everybody's going to be ugly. So, you know, as cute as they are, you need to do something about it or take them to a speech therapist. So, you say turkey and bird. Where's your tongue? Turkey, bird. Yeah, it's right behind your incisors, your flat teeth, almost touching the roof of your mouth. Whereas when you mispronounce it and you say talkie, board, it's down in the bottom of your mouth. Do you see what I'm getting at? It seems so obvious once somebody points it out to you. But when you're dealing with it with your own kid, you didn't know it. So the physical therapist will come in looking all professional and official, you know, probably a white lab coat and all that, so that the child's going, oh, this is big time now. You know, it's not mom like this in the morning going, say turkey. But, but anyway, so if, obviously can't be allergic, but if you're not allergic, they'll put peanut butter, like right there, and they'll say, now, read me this word list. And every time you say a word that has O-R, E-R, I-R, U-R, put your tongue in the peanut butter when you say it. And then they learn they can do it. But that's right in the office, right with the physical therapist. So they might make you come once or twice, but once you get it, then it's just a matter of you practicing them on those word lists, and they'll put it at the beginning of the word, and they'll put it at the end of the word, and they'll hide it in the middle of the word, so that the child is having to pay attention to what they're doing. You're trying to break that habit of them lowering that tongue in their mouth. So it all depends on what your child's problem is, but sometimes they're telling them what shape to put their lips in, or where to stick their tongue, or, you know, all kinds of different things that they're doing incorrectly. But it's pretty cool how quickly they take care of what you couldn't fix when you just know what they're doing. But you see, it takes a special personality to be things like occupational therapy assistant or physical therapy assistant or speech therapist, because you've got to get the patient to buy into what you're asking them to do. And so there's got to be a little of the psychologist type magic in your personality to get someone, you know, who's lost a digit or something, to do things in everyday life in a different way. And you know you can help them if they'll just try it with you. But, you know, there could be some pain associated with some of these things sometimes. So it takes a very special type of person to be able to get people to go along with it. Okay. But anyway, so the tongue is important, and we'll come back to speech in a minute. On the surface of your tongue, here's a tongue sticking out straight out at the board, but if you had the tongue sticking out towards that door over there, then this is the surface of your tongue right here. So on the surface of the tongue are a mixture of little nipple-shaped elevations. So anything that's a little elevation like that we call a papilla. This is the plural. And it's made out of stratified squamous epithelium, and sometimes this stratified squamous epithelium makes the papillae like whipped cream peaks on an icebox pie. And so since they look filamentous, that is called a filiform papilla, elongated and pointed. Those don't have any taste buds in them or anything. We think those are mainly just for texture, assessing texture of food and stuff like that. So that you see where they are, they're along the sides and back of the tongue. They're a little longer ones. Then on the sides and top of your tongue, you've got the two that have taste buds in them. The taste buds are called gustatory pores because your sense of taste is called gustation. Your sense of taste is called gustation. So, see how this looks like a little toadstool sticking up? And there's another little toadstool sticking up. Must be an ugly toadstool, but anyway. somebody thinks that looked like a mushroom-like toadstool. So fungi are the group of organisms that include the mushrooms. So these are called fungiform papillae. So filiform and fungiform. Look right down here. These gaps are called crypts. And you can spell crypt with a C or a K. So you will see it both ways, depending on whose book you're reading. But anyway, if you look down in the crypts, you see there are these little circular wads of nervous tissue in the fungiform papilla. Each one of those is a gustatory pore. So I've drawn 6 gustatory pores right there. You know what you're looking at? And you will see a slide of that today in lab. What you won't see a slide of is if you could stick your tongue way, way out, way back at the base of your tongue, there's some little round taste buds, which are circumvallate papillae. And we have about 8 to 12 of them. Your pig has only 2. So 2 days from now, when we do your pig dissection, you will get to see those in gross anatomy with your naked eye, the 2 circumvallate papillae. But ours are in an arrow-shaped configuration, and we have lots more than them, 6 to 12 circumvallate papillae. Newsflash, there are probably 2 other kinds of papillae also on your tongue. There's one that detects savory flavors, but they think there's another one as well. So these aren't all of them, but these are the only ones that we have a demonstration of anywhere. These on slides and these on your pig. Okay, if you go down inside the tongue, within the tongue, there is skeletal muscle, voluntary skeletal muscle. And it's important for 3 things. We've already talked about its role in deglutition, shoving the bolus of food backwards. The food ball is called a bolus. There's another word for you. But it also shoves your food over your teeth for the chewing, which is called mastication. We call that kind of stuff tongue wag. These are muscles at the base of your tongue. And so basically these are the muscles that move your tongue in, out, left, right, up, down in your mouth. That's what we mean by wagging your tongue around. If you're talking about thick and thinness of your tongue or curling your tongue, like those things we were talking about speech just a minute ago, that is muscle in your tongue. And so inside your tongue. So the muscle that is inside your tongue is intrinsic muscle because it's the organ we're talking about. The muscle that's only hooked to the back base of your tongue is called extrinsic muscle because it's going away from your tongue. Where's it going to? The hyoid bone. Remember all those muscles that you learned, stylohyoid, digastric, omohyoid? Those were the muscles that pull your tongue around in your mouth, and they're all going down and inserting on this hyoid bone that's just above your larynx in the muscle of your chin. Are we okay on that? This is all voluntary skeletal muscle, but at any rate. Now, communicating with your mouth, but not in your mouth, are salivary glands. They have ducts that lead to your oral cavity, though. So that's an exocrine gland. You should have learned glands that have ducts in Anatomy 1 were called exocrine glands. So all the salivary glands have ducts. They're called salivary glands because the mixture of solutions that they secrete into the oral cavity is collectively referred to as your saliva. What's in saliva? It is a lubricant for your food, so it'll slide down your pharynx and esophagus, and that lubricant is, the noun form of the word is the word mucus. When you're using as an adjective like mucus gland, it's M-U-C-O-U-S, but if you're just saying the noun is called mucus. What is it made out of? It is made out of a protein which, when it's mixed with water, becomes viscous and slick. So the protein is called mucin, and then it mixes with water that's also secreted. So you need to finish the word protein, then do so. The other thing that is in saliva besides just the lubricant mucus is an enzyme that digests starch. You can either call it salivary amylase or you can call it ptyalin. Notice the P is silent, ptyalin, and the Y is pronounced like a long I. Ptyalin is another name for salivary amylase. So digestion of starch is initiated in your mouth. Next time you go out to eat, because we usually are in such a hurry, we're wolfing our food down and we don't even forget what the first thing we ate tasted like. So when you're sitting there waiting for your salad to come or something and they've got the little saltine crackers on the table, put one in your mouth. Now what the first thing you're going to taste is the salt. So let the salt dissolve and then start slowly munching that cracker and keep it in your mouth longer than you normally would and see if it doesn't change from that sort of pasty, plain starch flavor to a little bit sweeter flavor. Because the only thing starch is made up of is glucose sugars, dextrose sugars. So if any digestion of the starch by the amylase doesn't occur in your mouth, then it should get sweeter as you retain it in your mouth. In the big picture, folks, that ain't much starch digestion going on in your mouth because it's going to start and then you're going to swallow it and then it's going to hit the acid of your stomach and that's going to denature and destroy this enzyme. So of the 100% starch you eat, maybe 5% gets digested before it gets denatured by the acids of the stomach. But anyway. Now, in lab, this is the slide we do because it has some of both types of glands, some of the mucus secreting and some of the digestive enzyme secreting glands. The parotid gland is the biggest salivary gland. It's right here near your ears. And when I was a little kid, there was a viral disease that you worried about men getting called mumps. And it sought out the parotid glands. And they'd puff up and you'd look like a little chipmunk. And if you got it, you wanted to get it when you were a little kid before puberty. Because in men, it could make the gonads swell, the testicles. And that's, of course, where the beginning cells that'll go through mitosis to produce all future cells live. And so if you get them before puberty, they haven't matured and become the cells that are going to form future sperm. But if they're in the sperm forming years and you damage those cells, then it may have an impact on sterility or not for the rest of his life. Will he be able to make enough viable sperm to conceive a baby? So now you don't have to worry about that too much because they have a vaccination for mumps. So that's a good thing. But anyway, so you may have heard of that. But it has a duct called Stenson's duct, one on each side of the jaw, and it dumps to the upper jaw and behind your second molar, and in that space between your cheek and your teeth, called the vestibule that I was talking to you about. But this is all the digestive enzyme secreting glands. So we didn't look at that because that's all you would see. Submandibular or submaxillary gland, it can be called either name because it's down under your lower jaw, so that definitely means it's down under your upper jaw as well. Most people call it submandibular though. It has a duct, Wharton's duct, that dumps behind your lower incisors in the floor of your mouth. It secretes ptyalin and mucus, so this is the one we're looking at in lab because you'll get to see some of each kind of gland. These glands, because they're slick viscous mucus, look clear on a slide, and these, because they're more watery, will take the stain, and so these stain very dark purple on the slide. So they're all cuboidal cells, you're just differentiating them by how they stained on the slide. There's another gland under the tongue, and it has numerous ducts under the tongue. Those are called ducts of Rivenus. But this is all mucus glands, so we didn't look at sublingual either. Linguus means tongue, so it's under your tongue, dumping into the floor of your mouth. Buccal glands, in your oral cavity, we've now established that this is your vestibule, but this, where you put your warhead candy, or where a squirrel puts its acorn, that's the buccal cavity, cheek cavity. So there's another mucus gland off there. And periodically, throughout digestive organs, esophagus, stomach, small intestine, there are numerous additional little mucus glands that could show up. It's just luck of the draw whether the slide we purchased was cut at the level of a mucus gland. So sometimes you'll see them into one slide prep and another brand or something you won't. Okay, so if we're talking voluntary, the route of the food ball, the bolus of food, is from your oral cavity through a heart-shaped opening called the fauces, into the part of your throat behind your mouth, oropharynx, pushing it down the laryngopharynx, and now you got to pick. Are you going to get crammed through the larynx, in which case you had to go through the glottis, so we hope you didn't go that route, thanks to the epiglottis, or you get shoved into the food chute, and that's the esophagus. To that point, you made it to the top of the esophagus, in the upper 1/3 of the esophagus. That was all voluntary. From now on, it is involuntary. So that throat you went through before it divided into esophagus versus larynx, everything above that, see, ended with the word pharynx, because that is the word that is your throat. The esophagus is just a food chute. Now, it is true that any digestion that began in your mouth, amylase working on starch, turning it to sugar, that's still going on. But there aren't any new secretions of digestive enzymes by your esophagus. So it's about a 10-inch tube. It's joining your pharynx to your stomach. It is involuntary smooth visceral muscle, so it moves the bolus, the food ball, along by peristalsis. And in the end, usually nothing stops it from entering your stomach, because there is a sphincter or valve at the end of the esophagus, but it tends to relax under pressure. So when it feels the pressure of the bolus of food coming, usually that sphincter just relaxes and the food plops right in to your stomach. So that valve has 3 different names: cardiac valve or sphincter, gastroesophageal valve or sphincter, or cardioesophageal valve or sphincter, because it's kind of right behind your heart, number one, and it's where the gastrostomach is joining your esophagus. I think most of us like to call it gastroesophageal, but either that or cardioesophageal. The one time it might not relax is if your stomach is already at maximum capacity. Then it might not let more food in. But unless you've overfilled your stomach like that, it generally will allow the food to come on into the stomach. So, assuming you have a stomach with a lot of food in it already, it's going to take a while to mix the bolus up with the extreme acid secretions that are in your stomach. So the maximum amount of time you could have been working on starch from the time it entered your mouth, went down your esophagus, and is now waiting to get mixed up in your stomach is maybe 15 to 30 minutes under the best case scenario. A lot of food in your stomach, and you chewed it a while, and all of that. And you still won't accomplish much starch digestion. 5% all the way to there. Now we're talking stomach. This is a stomach. And you're going to have a lot of this in lab as well. You have 3 regions in your stomach. Notice the diagonals. You have the region of the stomach that sticks up above the entrance of your esophagus. That's the fundus. You have the main part of the stomach and the biggest part of the stomach. That's the body. And you have the tapering end of the stomach, and that's the pylorus or pyloric region. And then this edge of the stomach is shorter than this edge. So this edge is called the lesser curvature, and this edge down here is called the greater curvature because it's a longer margin. Let me finish this comment and then I'll want to say something about the valves. The greater curvature has a double-layered membrane hanging from it, which is called your greater omentum. And the greater omentum hangs from here down over your small and large intestines and tucks up underneath them and kind of hoists them up like a supportive harness. That's a good thing because your pelvis is funnel shaped. If all the loops of your small intestine were just allowed to settle due to gravity pulling down, they would all get crammed down in that little funnel shaped pelvis bone, and it's like when you didn't ball your garden hose up right and it got a crimp in it. Nothing is going to move through the loops of your small and large intestine if it's not held separated. So it needs to be held up so that food can travel through the tube and not get a bend or a crimp in it. If you got a bend or a crimp in it, there are microbes that live in our digestive tract. They would keep putrefying the food, it would rot, and eventually it could eat a whole, it would kill that segment of your small or large intestine. That's a blockage, and it will kill it, and you'll have to have it removed. So it's an important support, double-layered support membrane, and they have to pick it up and throw it up over the top of the organs if you're going to do surgery down in the abdominopelvic cavity. And there's a lot of adipose embedded in it. So literally this means fatty apron, and that's why it has that name, because of all the adipose that's embedded in it. And of course, we're an obese society, so the more we put on weight, the more fat is in that greater omentum that you have to pull back and reflect back to do surgery. There is a lesser omentum on this edge, and what that is doing is trying to hold the stomach up to your liver. So the stomach's not falling down in your abdominopelvic cavity either. So that one is the lesser omentum to support the stomach. Tie it up to the liver. Okay? Any questions on those two double-layered omenta? This pyloric valve is down here. Right here would be pyloric valve. In lab, the introduction admits that the pyloric valve doesn't relax and let the food go through until it's semi-liquefied. In other words, about the consistency of thick pea soup. But it would hold anything that was not digested back and not let it leave the stomach yet. Well, what that implies is that pyloric sphincter, which is really sphinced, you'll in our pig dissection next time you'll appreciate that, but it's a very strong muscular sphincter. It probably never goes like this and relaxes fully. What it probably does is just tiny little relaxation so that only something that could kind of spurt through gets to spurt out of the stomach and into the small intestine. Because if it were to relax openly, then the flood of fluid would carry chunks with it. So it's more of just letting only what's gotten semi-liquefied to spurt through to the next organ, which is small intestine. So that's how that very powerful sphincter works. This one up here I told you is not a very good sphincter anyway. It just usually opens anytime something's trying to enter. You have these folds, these wrinkles inside your stomach that can uncurl like a girl's smocked dress can be accordioned open. That is called rugae. One is aruga, plural is the E on the end. So that allows the stomach to act as a storage sac for greater storing capacity. So you'll see those today in lab. Now this I haven't talked about before. If you are in a stomach, and you'll have just a little piece of stomach going across your slide, and so you might see a big old ruga like this on your slide, a fold sticking up. So you'll just be magnifying one of these little wrinkles, in a wrinkle. That's a ruga. But when you look up there in it, the surface is going to be columnar tissue, columnar epithelium. That's not what I'm talking about at the moment. The glands of your stomach are down in here, and they are cuboidal cells, because most glands are cuboidal epithelium. And remember, this is an ideal picture to get a point across. Yours is going to be much more crowded than what I'm drawing. But see how it's nice and parallel down there, subsurface? These glands are called gastric pits. So these are the glands of your stomach, the gastric pits. And they they secrete things, and the secretions literally percolate between the cracks of the cells to get to the inside of the stomach so they can act on the food. And it doesn't have a big gap. It's much closer together, but I'm just trying to show you how it works. And then up here, some of these columnar cells are goblet cells that secrete mucus. So all of this down to here is your mucus epithelium because it's various types of epithelial cells. So some of these cuboidal cells, their cytoplasm stains pink or red. This says red, but it's truthfully pale pink on the brand that we have. And if you're that cell, you're called a parietal cell. And parietal cells make the acid, hydrochloric acid, and also something we've already talked about in our study of blood, the intrinsic factor that was the carrier so that you could absorb vitamin B12 by the time you got to the small intestine. So this intrinsic factor is what the parietal cell is making, the carrier. You don't uptake the B12 until the small intestine. So the carrier molecule has been floating along by itself until you release B12 from your food down there in your small intestine. Then that will finally grab that and haul it into your bloodstream. The other cell has purple cytoplasm, and it secretes a protein splitting enzyme called pepsinogen. And I think we're out of time today. We will come back and start there next time. Okay?